The package came back unopened. It was a simple manila envelope, Ella's favorite books, a birthday card I had watercolored myself, and a small lavender-scented pouch to help her sleep. But there it was, lying on my doorstep with the return to sender stamp angled like a bruise. No explanation, no apology, just absence. I stood there frozen, unsure if this was a mistake or a message. For a moment, I convinced myself it was the Postal Service's fault, a mislabeled address, a clerical error, that maybe Aubrey hadn't seen it yet, that maybe Ella had been waiting by the door. But then I checked my phone. My text from 2 days ago, "Did Ella get the package?" still said, "Delivered." No read receipt, no response. I scrolled back. My last dozen texts sat unanswered, one-word replies before that. Then nothing. I dialed, straight to voicemail. And when I called again that evening, the voicemail message had changed. "You're not welcome in our lives anymore." Aubrey's voice was steady, clear, punctuated by silence. I sat on the edge of my bed, clutching the phone like it might break open and spill some reason. I replayed the message again and again, as if I'd hear something different the next time. Something softer. Something salvageable. "You're not welcome in our lives anymore." It had no edges, no anger, just cold precision. I hadn't fought with her. I hadn't shouted or accused or disrespected. I hadn't even seen her in weeks. I'd last seen Ella and Jonah 3 weeks ago, Sunday brunch. Ella had brought me a drawing of our backyard garden. Jonah fell asleep in my lap while I read to him about dinosaurs. When I said goodbye, they both hugged me like they always did. Tight, warm, trusting. And now I was a ghost in their world. I reached for my planner, flipped back through the calendar. Notes scrawled in blue ink. Pick up Ella, 3 p.m. Ballet recital, front row, Jonah's field trip chaperone. Every page, a memory I was part of. Now I couldn't even send a text. I didn't cry, not right away. I cleaned the kitchen, I refolded the laundry, I made tea I didn't drink. I went about my evening like my life hadn't just been erased by a single voicemail. It wasn't until I sat in the guest room, where the kids' drawings still hung on the walls, that I broke. The sob came from somewhere low in my chest, deep and aching. I covered my mouth with both hands, afraid that letting the sound out would make it real. That night, I didn't sleep. I just sat, watching the light change on the ceiling, wondering what crime I had committed to warrant this exile. The next morning, I called Nate. He answered on the second ring, voice flat. "Hey, Mom, do you have a minute?" A pause. "Not really. I'm heading into a meeting. I need to talk to you. It's important." He sighed, long and tired. "Is this about the message?" My heart twisted. "So you know?" "I know. Aubrey told me she sent it." There was silence between us, a gap that felt like a canyon. "Why?" I asked. "What happened?" "She says you've been undermining her, that you're interfering with the kids." "In what way?" "Mom," he said gently, "maybe it's best if we take some space." I felt the breath go out of me. "I've been there every week. I've helped raise those kids. How can she say I'm undermining her?" "I don't want to get in the middle." "But you are in the middle," I snapped. "You're my son." "And I'm their father," he replied, quieter now. "I need to protect what's best for them." "So I'm a threat?" He didn't answer. "I love them, Nate. I've never done anything but love them." "I know." "Then how can you let her do this?" His voice cracked. "Because I'm tired, Mom. Tired of trying to hold everything together. Tired of feeling like I'm choosing between you and her." "I never asked you to choose." "But she is." That was the end of it. He hung up. I stared at the wall for a long time, the dial tone humming in my ear. The days after blurred. I kept trying. I left voicemails, soft, pleading, reasonable. "I just want to understand. Can we talk? Just us? Please tell Ella and Jonah I love them." Every one of them went unreturned. I baked their favorite muffins, drove to their house, and left the basket on the porch. It was gone the next day, but no one called to say thank you. I started checking Aubrey's social media, something I never did. Her profile was private now, but her sister's wasn't. A new post, Ella's birthday party, a garden theme. There were balloons, cupcakes, face paint. Everyone was there, except me. They hadn't even told me when it was. I saw Jonah in a photo holding a toy truck I'd given him last year, still wearing the t-shirt I bought in spring. I zoomed in until my eyes blurred. I was erased, but my fingerprints remained. When I saw my therapist Miriam later that week, she asked how I was coping. "I'm angry," I said, "but mostly I feel disposable." She wrote something down and looked up. "Did you think you were replaced?" "No," I said. "I think I was discarded." She nodded slowly. "That's a grief not many people acknowledge. Being cut off without reason creates a kind of mourning." I tried to laugh, but it broke in my throat. "I wasn't perfect, I know that, but I wasn't cruel." "What do you think you did to deserve this?" I must have said something. Maybe I gave Ella too much sugar. Maybe I asked too many questions. I thought we had a rhythm. Miriam leaned forward. "Or maybe you were just an easy scapegoat." Her words sat with me for days. I began going through my old texts and emails with Aubrey, reading back years of brief messages. Her tone was always polite, always clipped, efficient, but never warm. I remembered our first meeting, how she called me Mrs. Gardner until I insisted on Margot. She had smiled, nodded, and never said my name again. I'd ignored it, just like I ignored how she never laughed at my jokes, never stayed long after dinners, never let me take the kids overnight without triple-checking everything I did. It wasn't war, but it wasn't love either. And Nate, my son, he had become quiet, even as a teenager, withdrawn after his father died. I thought I'd been enough. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe I was never invited in, just allowed to stand on the porch. And now that door had shut, locked from the inside. I stared at my phone one last time. No messages, no calls. Just the same photo of Ella and Jonah as my wallpaper, smiling in a sunbeam, faces pressed together like the world couldn't touch them. And maybe it couldn't. But it had touched me. It had broken me. And I didn't even know why. I used to think Aubrey liked me. Not adored me, not leaned on me, but liked me in the mild, mutual respect kind of way you hope for with your daughter-in-law. She brought me scented candles at Christmas. She laughed at my stories at baby showers. She let me host birthdays and never argued when I wanted Ella in matching dresses. But when I look back now, really look, I realize I mistook politeness for peace. She never actually opened the candles. They stayed in the guest bathroom, untouched. She never asked me about my life unless Nate was in the room. And when I offered help, her smile tightened like something bracing against wind. In public, she always made a point to thank me. "Margot's such a godsend," she once said at Ella's baptism, her arm looped through mine like it belonged there. "We'd be lost without her." But alone, I was too much or not enough. "You're spoiling her," she'd whisper when I slipped Ella a second cookie. "I prefer if Jonah naps in the crib, not your bed," she'd text, like a scolding note pinned to a fridge. "You really shouldn't question how we do things, Margot. It's not helpful." I told myself she was tired. New motherhood was hard. Maybe she didn't mean it the way it landed. But it landed all the same. Nate, when I asked about it once, just shrugged. "She's sensitive. Just give her space." That was always his answer. Give her space, give her time. Give her the benefit of the doubt. What I didn't see then, and can barely stomach now, was how often I gave pieces of myself away just to keep the peace. Now I spend my afternoons sorting through photo albums. The old ones are heavy, leather-bound, gold-edged. The newer ones are glossy, thinner, almost plastic in how curated they feel. I flip through them like they hold clues. In one, Aubrey stands next to me at Ella's second birthday. We're both smiling. She's wearing white linen and I'm in blue. Ella's face is messy with frosting. I'm holding Jonah on my hip, fresh from a diaper change. Everyone looks happy, perfect. But when I zoom in, really look, I see it. Aubrey's hand curled too tightly around her wine glass. The set of Nate's jaw, like he was grinding his teeth. The way I'm angled just enough to the side, like I'm preparing to leave or be cropped out. I stare at that photo for a long time. And then I turn the page. I start marking the ones where she was warm and where she was cool. I track them like weather patterns, the nights after arguments, the mornings after birthdays where I maybe said too much, stayed too long, offered too many suggestions, and then I make a mistake. I open Nate's old tablet, the one he left in my house after helping set up my Wi-Fi years ago. I'd forgotten about it entirely. But now, looking for a distraction, I charge it. It boots up faster than I expect. No password. I scroll. Emails, documents, old family photos. My heart tightens. And then I see it. A message app I don't recognize. Not iMessage, not WhatsApp, something with a red logo. I tap it. At first, I see nothing. Then a thread loads, titled Family Roundtable. My name isn't on the participant list. I scroll and scroll. Photos from vacations I wasn't invited to. Inside jokes. School projects I didn't know about. And comments. So many comments. She means well, but she's suffocating, Aubrey writes. She just bulldozes, adds her sister Paige. I can't talk to her about boundaries. She gets defensive, Aubrey again. And then Nate. I'll talk to her again. Maybe suggest she step back for a while. My heart cracks. There's more. She gave Jonah candy after bedtime again. She keeps implying we're not affectionate enough. She's toxic. That word, like a bell ringing underwater. I close the app. My hands shake. I feel nauseous. They've been building this narrative for years, brick by brick. A version of me that doesn't exist except in whispers behind private screens. I try to breathe. I walk into the kitchen, wash my hands. The water is too hot. Back in the living room, the tablet still glows. I want to throw it. I want to scream. But instead, I sit down and I start writing. I list everything I remember doing for them. Every birthday I planned. Every night I babysat. Every dinner I brought over when Aubrey was sick. Every time I swallowed a correction or changed my schedule to help. I reread it and still wonder, was I really so awful? Was love not enough because it came with opinions? I think of my own mother, how she'd once told me, don't overstay your welcome, even in your own family. I used to think she was bitter. Now I think she was just tired of watching her love get rewritten by people who never asked her side. I don't show anyone the messages, not yet. Instead, I take the album back off the shelf and keep flipping. There's one picture I stop on. Ella, age 4, sitting on my lap at the botanical gardens. She's holding a butterfly on her finger. Her face is pure awe. I remember that day. Aubrey was late. Nate hadn't come. It was just us, Ella and me. The sun was golden. The air smelled like earth and sweetgrass. She'd looked up at me and said, "You're my favorite person." That moment, at least, was real. And no group chat can take it away. Grief has a way of digging backward. After discovering the group chat, after seeing the word toxic next to my name like a branding mark, I couldn't stop the rewind. It was like something broke loose inside me, and all the years before Nate and Aubrey came rushing up like floodwater, I found myself standing in my hallway, staring at a photo I'd walked past 1,000 times. My mother, Lillian, at 25, hair in a neat twist, lips drawn in, hands folded across a crisp dress. She looked composed, elegant, until you noticed her eyes. They were hard, measuring. She raised us on obedience and silence. Emotion was indulgence, sadness was weakness, anger was disrespect. I don't remember being hugged, I remember being instructed. When I was 7 and cried over a dead bird I found near our porch, she handed me a paper towel and said, "Tears won't fix it. Clean it up." When I got my first period, she slid a booklet across the table and said, "Don't embarrass yourself." When I married my husband, Charles, she wrote in her card, "Keep your voice soft and your dinners hot. That's all a man really needs." I followed that script for years. I cooked, I softened, I swallowed the things I wanted to scream. When Charles died of a heart attack, I grieved in the laundry room, quietly folding shirts, pretending nothing had changed. I raised Nate in that silence. I thought I was doing better than she had. I told myself that every time I read to him or let him sleep in my bed during thunderstorms. But I still expected composure, still praised him most when he was calm, agreeable, good. I didn't teach him how to feel. I taught him how to behave. A week after discovering the chat, I got a letter from Lorraine, my sister. It was handwritten, full of jagged loops and crossed-out lines. We hadn't spoken in 5 years. She'd left after a fight at Thanksgiving, when I told her she was being too harsh on Nate. But the envelope was thick and deliberate. It said, "Margot, because someone finally needs to tell you the truth." Her words sliced like razors, but they didn't miss. "You always played peacekeeper, Margot," she wrote, "but peace that comes at the cost of truth isn't peace. It's denial in pearls. She recounted moments I'd forgotten. How I'd covered for Nate when he lied about failing a class. How I'd blamed his bad moods on puberty, stress, girls. Never on the possibility that maybe he was struggling to be someone he didn't know how to be. You never listened to him, she wrote. You listened for the version of him you wanted. And then, near the bottom of the second page, the line that gutted me. Maybe Aubrey didn't cut you out. Maybe she cut out the version of you that refused to see her. I stared at that sentence for a long time, read it 5 times, 10. Lorraine wasn't always kind, but she was always right when it hurt the most. I set the letter aside and opened the old cedar box from my closet. It still smelled faintly of mint and dust. Inside were clippings, baby booties, Charles's obituary, and near the bottom, my mother's letter from my wedding day. It was on pale pink stationery, the kind she reserved for special occasions. The ink had faded slightly, but the tone was as sharp as ever. Marriage is duty, don't expect it to fill you. Keep your opinions to yourself unless asked. Remember, men leave. It's your job to make it harder for them. I folded the letter back into its envelope. That was her legacy. That's what I'd inherited, what I'd passed down in quieter ways. I thought of Aubrey again, her control, her perfectionism, the icy silences that came whenever she felt challenged. Had she grown up with a Lillian of her own? Had I reminded her of something she thought she'd escaped? What if I wasn't just a victim of exclusion? What if I was a mirror she couldn't bear to look into? Later that week, I called Lorraine. She didn't sound surprised. I figured you'd reach out after the letter, she said. Took you longer than I expected. You're not easy to talk to. Neither are you, she said simply, but I always preferred hard truth over soft delusion. We met for coffee the next morning. She looked older, tired in the way people do when they've spent their lives holding boundaries no one else respected. We sat by the window. The air between us was brittle. I read your letter, I said. I know. I didn't like it. Not really my concern. But you were right, I added, and watched her shoulders ease just a bit. We talked, not just about Nate and Aubrey, but about Lillian, about how we each coped, me with perfection, her with distance. She'd left home at 18. I'd stayed until marriage. Lillian broke us early, she said. You just wrapped your wounds in better wallpaper. I thought I was healing. You were performing. We finished our coffee in silence. Before we parted, she handed me a small envelope. What's this? Something Mom never meant to send. Inside was a second letter. One Lorraine had found in an old drawer after Lillian died. It was addressed to me, never sealed. It was angry, defensive. But buried in the middle, one line stood out. I don't know how to love women who don't need me. I felt my throat close. I think she meant you, Lorraine said, but also herself. I held the letter all the way home, folded, then opened, then folded again. I thought about Nate, about how I'd clung to being needed, how I mistook compliance for closeness, how I'd never really known how to love someone without trying to manage their life. Maybe Aubrey felt that too. I didn't know how to undo the inheritance I'd passed down, but maybe I could stop passing it forward. I hadn't meant to start reading the journals. They were tucked in a linen box in the back of my closet, bound in navy leather with gratitude embossed on the cover, like that made them less personal. I'd bought them after Nate's wedding, back when my therapist at the time, before Miriam, told me that writing would help me process the transition. I didn't process anything. I wrote lists. I documented casseroles I'd made for Aubrey after Jonah's birth. I sketched seating charts for Ella's baby shower. I made polite bullet points of things I wanted to say and never did. But as I read now, years later, something shifted. Aubrey changed the nursery wallpaper without asking, said mine was too loud. I didn't argue. Nate seemed tense tonight, wouldn't meet my eyes, said he's just tired. But he flinched when she touched his shoulder. Jonah cried when I left. Aubrey said it's because I coddle him, but I think it's because he's the only one who gets to fall apart. I'd ignored the red flags, tucked them away under labels like adjustment period, new family dynamics, learning curve. I'd written every warning off as something small, something survivable. I used to think that was grace, letting things go, not making a fuss. But grace, I've come to realize, is not the same as complicity. The problem was, I thought peace meant swallowing discomfort. I thought love meant endurance. A week after rereading those journals, I booked another session with Miriam. I hadn't seen her since Charles died. She looked the same: gray cardigan, wire-rimmed glasses, that endless supply of peppermint tea. She didn't smile much, but when she did, it felt earned. I sat on her couch, staring at the corner of the rug, unsure where to begin. "Well," I said after a long silence, "it seems I've been excommunicated." Her pen didn't move. "Tell me what that means." "My daughter-in-law sent me a voicemail saying I'm no longer welcome. My son won't intervene. My grandkids, they probably think I disappeared." "And how does that make you feel?" I almost laughed. Like I must have missed a step. Like I followed all the rules but still ended up locked outside the game. "And what rules were those?" Be helpful, be invisible, be useful, but never invasive. Be the kind of woman people thank but don't listen to. Miriam leaned forward slightly. "Why do you assume survival means silence?" The question hit me hard. "Because my mother taught me that silence is safer than shame," I whispered. "And because being liked felt more important than being honest." She nodded. "Not writing, not rushing." Later, she said something I wrote down afterward. "Sometimes we inherit the blueprint for our own erasure." After that session, I called Daryl. We'd been friends once, years ago. Charles had always found her too blunt, so I kept her at a distance. But she was the kind of person who remembered birthdays, who brought lemon bars to funerals, and who didn't let you get away with pretending you were fine. We met at a small cafe near the marina. She wore a wide-brimmed hat and no makeup, like always. She kissed my cheek and ordered black coffee with extra cinnamon. "All right," she said after I'd explained everything. "So are you going to keep martyring yourself, or are you finally ready to do something about it?" "I don't know what to do," I admitted. "Well, first off," she said, slicing into a scone like it had offended her, "you stop acting like being excluded is the same thing as being powerless." "I didn't say I was powerless." "You didn't have to. You talk like someone who's waiting for permission to be angry." I blinked. "Margot," she said, softer now, "you didn't fail because you weren't enough. You failed because you disappeared so slowly you didn't even notice." Her words stuck. We walked by the water afterward, not saying much. She told me about her garden, her recent surgery, the dog she adopted, and then she looked at me and said, "Start by naming what you buried." I went home and opened Nate's old desk drawer. He'd used the study upstairs during high school and again briefly after college, before he moved in with Aubrey. I'd left most of it untouched. Old textbooks, USB drives, spiral notebooks. At the back of the drawer was a small flash drive, unmarked. It felt meaningless, light. I plugged it into my laptop. Inside, a single file. Recording.aac. I clicked it. Nate's voice, hesitant, quiet, tired. "I don't know who this is for," he began. "Maybe me. Maybe a therapist I'll never call. Maybe Mom." I froze. He sighed on the recording, then paused. I heard him set something down. A glass, maybe? Aubrey, she doesn't hit me. She's not that kind of abuser, but she controls everything. What I wear, what I say, what I feel safe feeling. She corrects me in public. She calls me spineless when I cry. She tells the kids I'm weak." My throat closed. I thought I could handle it, thought I could protect them by absorbing it. But lately, I'm not sure I'm protecting anyone. I just feel erased. There was a long silence. Then, "If I ever give this to you, it means I've given up." The recording ended. I sat in that chair for over an hour, staring at nothing. This was never about just me. This was about a son raised to perform stability, a man who inherited silence as a strategy, a family that learned not to scream, even when it hurt. I don't know why he never sent the recording. I don't know if he ever will, but I know now that his absence, his withdrawal, wasn't cowardice. It was survival. I copied the file to my own drive. I didn't tell anyone, not yet, but I will, because silence may have buried the truth. But it also preserved it. And now, I'm the one digging it back up. Aubrey always played her part well. She had the kind of composed elegance that made strangers admire her and families second-guess their own memories. She wore beige and navy like they were personality traits, never raised her voice in public, and posted curated photos of Sunday pancakes and handwritten notes in lunchboxes. She organized charity brunches and sent thank you cards written in perfect cursive. Blessed, she captioned one photo of Ella napping on her chest. Our quiet life. I used to believe it. We all did. But now, when I scroll through those old images, I see the staging. The white kitchen spotless, the kids always in neutral colors. Nate, when he appears, is smiling, but only with his mouth. His eyes are dull, shadowed. In photo after photo, Aubrey is front and center, always touching one of the kids, as if to stake a claim, as if to perform affection. What haunts me most isn't how well she played the role. It's how desperately I wanted to believe the performance. I remember one summer afternoon, not long after Jonah was born, I stopped by unannounced, something I rarely did. I had brought a set of watercolor blocks for Ella and a tin of lemon scones Aubrey used to like. She answered the door too quickly. Her hair was pulled up in a way that made her cheekbones seem too sharp. Her makeup was fresh, but her shirt was wrinkled. Jonah was crying somewhere in the house. "Oh, hi, Margot," she said too brightly. "Did we have something scheduled?" I apologized, offered to leave. She waved me in, already turning on that voice. Light even, precise. Nate walked in from the hallway a few minutes later. His shirt was inside out, his face blotchy. He didn't speak right away. Aubrey placed her hand on his arm, but he flinched, just slightly, but enough that my stomach turned. "We're having a bit of a morning," she said, laughing. "Nothing a little caffeine can't fix." I handed her the tin of scones. She took it with fingers that trembled. I didn't ask anything. I drank the tea she gave me, complimented the new curtains, and left 20 minutes later. That night I told myself it was none of my business. Months later, Nate came over to help me clean the garage. It was fall, cold enough for jackets, but still light outside. We were sorting through old boxes when I found an envelope of drawings from his childhood. He sat down on the concrete floor and picked one up, a scribble of a dinosaur he'd drawn at 5. He didn't say anything for a long time. Then he started crying. Not the loud, chest-racking kind, just soft, steady tears. I knelt beside him and asked what was wrong. He shook his head. "I don't know. I just feel like I can't breathe sometimes." I held his shoulder, asked if he wanted to talk. He said, "I'm fine, just tired." And I let him go. Later, Miriam asked me about that day. I told her what I remembered, how I hadn't pressed, how I thought it was kinder to let him be. "You weren't imagining it," she said gently. "You were excusing it." I stared at her. "You think I should have pushed?" "I think you believed that silence was safer than conflict, but silence doesn't protect people. It isolates them." I wrote that down, folded it into the pages of my journal. A week after that session, I ran into Jenna, my old neighbor, while shopping for herbs at the garden center. She looked surprised to see me. We hugged out of habit more than affection. "I heard what happened," she said carefully. "The voicemail, the cutoff." "Word travels," I muttered. She hesitated. "Listen, I wasn't going to say anything, but I feel like you should know. That wasn't the first red flag." I blinked. "What do you mean?" "That night last December," she said. "I was outside with my dog. It was late, around 10. Your house was dark. I guess you'd gone to bed early, but I could hear yelling from next door." My breath caught. "Yelling?" "From the garage. Aubrey was screaming at Nate. Not loud enough to make out everything, but enough to know it wasn't a small fight. I remember hearing her say, 'You're a joke of a man. Even your mother thinks I'm better than you.'" The words punched through me. "I didn't want to get involved," she added. "I figured they'd work it out, but afterward, I saw him sitting on the front steps, alone, like a statue." I swallowed. "Thank you for telling me." She nodded. "I always thought she was calculated, but I didn't think she'd go this far." That night, I thought about Christmas. Not the fight Jenna heard, but the dinner afterward. The way Aubrey made Nate carve the turkey, even though his hand was bandaged. The way she corrected every word he said during conversation. How she laughed when he forgot the name of a wine varietal and said, "God, Nate, just let me talk." Everyone laughed. I did too, nervously, because that's what you do when someone performs cruelty as comedy. Now I couldn't unsee it. I found the photos from that night. Us in front of the tree, Aubrey, in red velvet. Nate pale and smiling too hard. Ella sat in my lap holding her new doll. Jonah in his high chair, messy with cranberry sauce. We looked like joy. But under the surface, under the wine and the lights and the curated illusion, there was rot. I sat in the living room and deleted every filtered photo I'd once posted from that night. It felt symbolic, like sweeping ash off a hearth that never gave warmth. Later, I went to therapy again. I remember the moment I believed she was the perfect wife, I told Miriam. When was that? The engagement party. She made this speech about family and love and building traditions. Everyone clapped, I cried, and she looked at me like she had just won something. And what do you believe now? I took a long breath. That she was never trying to love us. She was trying to control the story. Miriam didn't reply, just nodded. And I realized I'd done the same, in my own quiet way, clinging to a version of our family that looked good in pictures. But perfection is often the first lie we learn to believe, and the last one we're willing to give up. The fireproof safe sat behind the coats in the front hall closet, wedged between a stack of tax folders and the emergency flashlight. I hadn't opened it in years, not since Charles died, and I'd needed to track down our marriage certificate for the funeral director. Even then, I'd barely glanced at the contents. Birth certificates, insurance paperwork, a sealed manila folder labeled Last Will and Testament. That morning, I pulled it out and set it on the dining table. The sound of metal scraping over wood echoed louder than expected. The key turned easily, like it had been waiting. Inside, neatness. A few typed sheets. A copy of Nate's birth certificate. One of Ella's crayon drawings. A black and white photo of Charles in his Navy uniform. And the will. I stared at it for a long time before calling Cameron. He'd been my lawyer since Charles and I bought the house. Practical, mild, and a stickler for language. He still sent me Christmas cards with his firm's logo on them. "Are you sure you want to revise the entire thing?" he asked, his voice gentle but skeptical. "I'm not angry," I said. "I'm just clear." He hesitated. "May I ask what changed?" "Everything, and also nothing," I replied. "This isn't revenge, it's correction." When we met in his office 2 days later, he laid out the paperwork. The language was dense, emotionless, exactly what I needed. "Would you like to remove Nathan entirely or allocate a reduced percentage?" I tapped the pen against the edge of the document. "Remove." Cameron adjusted his glasses. "And the grandchildren." I paused. "I don't know if I'll ever see them again. But if I do, if they find their way back, I'll make arrangements then, separately." He watched me, frowning. "This is a significant change," he said. "It may be perceived as personal." "It is personal," I replied. "But it's also principled." He leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled. "Most people make their wills out of love." "So did I said. "But love isn't inherited. It's chosen." He didn't argue. I signed the forms, initialed in all the right places, left the office feeling lighter and lonelier than I expected. That night, I boxed up heirlooms. Not to throw them away, just to release them from the pedestal they'd lived on for too long. The porcelain teapot Charles's grandmother gave us, Ella's baptism dress, a quilt I made from Nate's childhood t-shirts. I labeled each box with dates, not names. Afterward, I sat at the dining table, paper and pen in front of me, and began writing a letter to include with the will. "To whoever finds this, know that I made this decision not in anger, but in the shadow of silence. Not in bitterness, but in the clarity of being erased. Love deserves more than endurance, and legacies should be earned, not expected. MG." I folded it, slid it into the envelope marked "Updated Will Read First." The next morning, I printed new family photos, ones with Lena, Monroe, Daryl, and me in the backyard, covered in soil and laughter. I replaced the frames in the hallway. I shredded others, not in fury, just release. The Christmas photo with everyone smiling through clenched teeth, gone. The family beach trip where I paid for everything and was asked to stay out of the sun for the group shot, gone. Even the wedding photo, not the framed one, but the small one from a drawer. Aubrey in lace, Nate in gray, both looking into a future they never made room for me in. Gone. It was around this time I started organizing the safe again, scanning old financial documents, closing accounts I no longer needed. That's when I saw it. A transfer, 4 years ago. $28,500 wired to an account labeled Caldwell Family Growth Fund. I hadn't authorized it. I called the bank. They confirmed it had been approved with digital verification. Likely initiated by a joint account holder, the representative said. I hadn't shared an account with anyone since Charles passed. Could there have been a power of attorney on file? She asked. It hit me all at once. The year Nate and Aubrey helped me simplify my finances after my hip surgery. I'd been overwhelmed, grateful. They said they'd only digitize a few things, make life easier. Cameron had even reviewed the forms, but one of them, a minor clause buried deep, had given Nate temporary control of my secondary account. He'd said it was just in case. I pulled up the statement. The funds had been used to secure a down payment, their current home. It wasn't fraud. It was just invisible consent, a favor they never returned. I sat down, breathing through the tremor building in my hands, not just because of the money, but because of what it meant. They'd already taken their inheritance, quietly, without asking. The will I had just rewritten? It was correcting something that had already been undone. I opened my journal. They used my trust like a vault key, and never looked back. I didn't cry, not then. I just closed the safe and locked it behind me. Lorraine showed up at my door on a Tuesday, holding a manila folder and wearing that look. Chin high, jaw clenched, like she'd prepared herself for whatever mess she was about to walk into. She didn't ask to come in. She just raised the folder, said, I think you need to see this, and walked past me into the kitchen. We hadn't spoken in 2 weeks. Our last conversation had ended with her saying, if you're not ready to name the damage, then you're not ready to heal from it. I'd hung up on her, but she came anyway. I poured coffee. She didn't drink it. I was cleaning out my files, she said, sliding the folder toward me. Found emails from Nate, years ago. I hesitated. You're not the only person he reached out to, she added, quieter now. You were just the one he was trying to protect. The folder was thick. I opened it slowly. The first was an email dated back to 2018. Aubrey screams at me every time I question her. She says I'm weak, that I'm lucky she hasn't taken the kids and left. Sometimes I believe her. Sometimes I wish she would. There were others, dozens, some long, others fragmented. Panic at 2 a.m. shame wrapped in logic. One note ended with, I'm not safe. But if I leave, I'll lose everything. My hands shook as I read. There was one voicemail transcription from a service Lorraine used. His voice, typed into digital permanence. I don't need saving. I need space to be seen without being dissected. I felt like the floor fell out from under me. I had missed it all. I thought I was shielding him from the world, holding back judgment, letting him find his footing. But I wasn't shielding him. I was insulating myself from the reality that my son had been crying for help in every way he could without setting the whole house on fire. Lorraine watched me without flinching. I didn't bring this to punish you, she said. I brought it so you'd finally stop romanticizing your role. I was his mother, I whispered. You were a mother who protected her son from pain, not the pain he caused others, just the pain he carried. The words cut deep, and I didn't try to stop the tears that followed. I cried at the kitchen table for the better part of an hour, not the small, tidy tears I'd learned to let fall when no one was looking. These were the kind of tears that left you raw, rib-sore, undone. I should have done more, I said eventually. You still can, Lorraine said, if you're willing to stop choosing guilt over action. That night, I didn't sleep. I laid awake staring at the ceiling, cataloging every moment I let pass without question. Every instance, I accepted Nate's avoidance as coping. Every time I called Aubrey particular, instead of what she really was, controlling, emotionally volatile, strategically cruel. The next morning, I emailed Miriam. We met that afternoon. I brought the folder. I want to do something, I said. Not out of vengeance, out of necessity. She nodded. What are you thinking? I hesitated. Custody, guardianship, something, anything. I know it's unlikely. I know it's complicated, but I can't pretend anymore. We spent the hour making lists, legal options, advocacy contacts, emotional readiness. Miriam helped me write a preliminary statement. She told me to speak only the truth, not the version shaped by shame or fear. You're not writing to win a battle, she said. You're writing to plant your feet. I sat in her office until the sun went down. That weekend, I called a family attorney Lorraine recommended, Elena Cruz. She had the kind of voice that made you feel braver just by listening.
I explained the situation in fragments, expecting hesitation. Instead, she said, "Let's start by protecting your access rights. Then we'll see if there's ground for anything further." I wasn't promising court. I wasn't threatening anything, but I was stepping into the light. One morning, a week into this new version of myself, I received a package. No return address. Just my name, written in blue marker, and a smudge of what looked like peanut butter on the corner. Inside, a drawing, Ella's handwriting, the sun too big, the people small, a house with a red door, a gray-haired figure in the window. Next to it, in careful block letters, "I miss you." No signature, no date. But I knew it was her. I held it like it was holy. For all the steps I'd taken to move forward, I hadn't realized how much of me was still standing at the door, waiting for a sign that love remembered. That drawing was it. Not forgiveness, not reconciliation, just a small voice echoing through the silence I'd been buried under. I framed it, set it on my desk, and wrote a letter, not to Nate, not to Aubrey, but to Ella. "My dearest Ella, you don't owe me anything. Not explanations, not allegiance, not permission to love me. But I want you to know, your voice found me. Your love still lives here, in this house, in this heart. And one day, when you're ready, I'll be here. Not waiting, just open."
I sealed it, tucked it in the same fireproof safe, marked it with her name. That night I walked through the house, lights dimmed, hands trailing across the backs of chairs, door frames, picture edges. I wasn't mourning, not anymore. I was mapping a new future, not built on repair, but on truth. There's a moment after the storm passes when the house feels unfamiliar. Not because it's changed, but because you finally see it clearly. The windows are smeared. The walls carry echoes. The picture frames hang a little too straight, as if trying too hard. That's how my life felt after Ella's drawing arrived. Not broken, not whole, just waiting to be named again. For months, I had defined myself by who I was to others: Nate's mother, Ella and Jonah's grandma, Charles's widow, Lorraine's sister, even Miriam's client. But I hadn't once asked who I was without the roles. The first thing I did was move the armchair in the living room. It had always sat beneath the window, next to the lamp Charles bought on our 15th anniversary. I moved it to the opposite corner, just because I wanted to. Then I rearranged the photos, took down the formal portraits, replaced them with snapshots from my garden, handwritten recipes, a note from Monroe I'd kept in a drawer. It wasn't an overhaul, just a shift, a reframing. That's when I saw the flyer. At the library bulletin board, right next to the schedule for chair yoga. Volunteers needed. Lakeside Women's Support Collective. I didn't know why it called to me. But the next morning I drove to the address, a modest 2-story brick building with chipping paint and a mailbox that leaned left. Inside it smelled of lavender and laundry soap. Women moved through the rooms like fog, quiet, heavy, present. There were boxes of baby clothes, shelves of toiletries, a bin labeled Notes of Hope, filled with handwritten encouragement cards. I signed up to sort donations. They gave me a corner room, a table, and a stack of tiny onesies to fold. I folded for hours. Pink, blue, yellow, patterns with elephants and clouds. Each fold felt like a benediction, a soft press of healing into cloth. At one point, I looked down and realized I was crying, not sobbing, just silent tears landing on cotton. I didn't stop, didn't apologize. I was feeling, and that felt like progress. That's where I met Ivy. She was 23, slight, with hair dyed copper and chipped black nail polish. She offered me a paper cup of tea without asking who I was or why I was there. We sat in the sorting room together, folding clothes and not talking until we were both ready. She told me she'd left a fiancé who once tracked her phone location and told her who to unfollow on social media. "He never hit me," she said. "So I didn't think it counted." I nodded. "I used to think if no one bled, it wasn't abuse." Ivy smiled, sharp, understanding. "Turns out words leave bruises too." She started coming in on my shift days. We organized together, laughed, swapped sandwich recipes, shared stories, not the big ones, but the tiny betrayals that pile up like dust. One afternoon, she asked if I'd ever heard of a woman named Aubrey Marchand. The air left my lungs. "Yes," I said. "She's my former daughter-in-law." Ivy sat down hard. "She mentored me once, through a nonprofit media internship. She picked 3 of us. Said we were her legacy women, taught us how to pitch, how to posture, how to behave. I didn't speak. She was charming, so polished, but she could cut you open without raising her voice. Made me feel like every mistake I made was a personal betrayal. My hands curled into fists. She told me once that I'd never make it in journalism unless I lost 10 pounds and stopped smiling like a mascot. Ivy looked at me. It's not just your family. She's been this way with others. Controlled. Cold. Exacting. Do you have anything? I asked, my voice too hopeful. Proof? Ivy pulled out her phone. I recorded some of our meetings, not because I knew they'd be useful, just because I needed to hear if I was imagining it. She played a clip. Aubrey's voice, icy and clipped, came through the speaker. Your anxiety is not my problem, Ivy. If you can't deliver, you're disposable. Don't confuse my support with patience. I felt nauseous. There's more, Ivy said. Emails, too. She sent one to another intern after she had a miscarriage, told her personal grief is not a hall pass for underperformance. I leaned back, stunned. Would you be willing to share those with my lawyer? Already copied to a secure drive, she said. You're not the only one she's ghosted into invisibility. I exhaled. This wasn't vindication. It wasn't even relief. It was confirmation. Aubrey's pattern wasn't a private rot. It was structural, practiced, masked as mentorship, as perfection, as concern. And now I had someone else who saw it too. Later that evening, I wrote a note for Miriam. I think I'm beginning to remember myself. It didn't feel dramatic. It felt like spring after a cruel winter, the kind where things bloom late, but with deep roots. I wasn't just reframing pictures on my wall. I was reframing me. I found out Ella turned 10 from a Facebook post I wasn't supposed to see. It came through an old bridge partner who hadn't unfriended me, probably out of forgetfulness more than loyalty. There she was, Ella, in a yellow dress I'd never seen, standing in front of a backyard picnic table covered in pastel streamers and cupcakes arranged to spell out her name. She was smiling, cake on her chin, surrounded by other children. No sign of Nate, no sign of me, just Aubrey, in the background, holding Jonah, looking like the perfect mother. I stared at the image until it blurred. Not because I was crying yet, but because I didn't know how to. I hadn't been invited. I hadn't even been told it was happening. But I marked the date anyway, wrote it down in my planner in capital letters, Ella, 10 years. I went to the local bookstore the next morning, picked out a hardcover journal with a silver lock and a pen shaped like a feather. I wrapped them in brown paper and tied them with blue twine. I included a letter, simple and soft. Dear Ella, happy birthday, my love. This is for your thoughts, your dreams, your secrets. I hope you fill it with the beautiful mess of who you are. I love you. Always. Grandma. I mailed it to their address. I used delivery confirmation not out of paranoia, but because I wanted to know it arrived. It did, signed by A. Marchand. 3 days later, it came back. Marked return to sender. The wrapping untouched. The twine still knotted. I opened the box in my car, didn't even wait to drive home. I tore it open with shaking hands, pulled out the journal, the letter, the careful hope I'd tried to send. That's when it hit me. Not just the absence. Not just the insult, the wall. The deliberate, echoless wall that had been built between us. And I broke. For the first time in years, I cried. Deep, ugly, keening tears. The kind I thought I'd aged out of. I sobbed until my chest ached, forehead pressed against the steering wheel, Ella's name still written on the return label in my own handwriting. I didn't go home right away. I parked in the far corner of a grocery store lot and sat there until dusk. My phone buzzed just before sunset. A message from Lorraine. Open your door. We brought pie and wine. I blinked, confused, then laughed, the sound scratchy and broken. When I pulled into my driveway, their car was already there. Ivy climbed out first, holding a blueberry pie still warm from her neighbor's oven. Lorraine had a bottle of red tucked under her arm and a deck of cards in her pocket. They didn't ask questions. We went straight to the back deck, wrapped ourselves in mismatched blankets, and watched the stars come out. You okay? Ivy asked eventually. No, I said, but I'm grateful. Lorraine poured the wine. You don't need to be in their photos to be part of their story. I nodded slowly. But it still hurts, I whispered. I feel like I've been cut out of a life I helped build. You weren't cut out, Ivy said. You were pushed out, and there's a difference. I looked up at the sky. The stars were faint, but steady. I don't know how to keep loving someone who's gone quiet on me, I admitted. You don't stop, Lorraine said. You just learn to speak louder in the ways they might one day hear. Later, when the pie was gone and the wine low, Ivy handed me a small notebook. I picked this up last week, she said. Thought maybe it was time you wrote your version. Inside, the first page was blank. On the second, Ivy had written 2 words in loopy print, without permission. I felt something stir in my chest, half fear, half fire. That night, after they left, I sat in my office and opened the notebook. I didn't plan, I didn't outline. I just began. Chapter 1. They never asked if I wanted to be silent. They just treated my silence like consent. It was late September when Nate finally called. His name lit up my phone like an old wound, familiar, sudden, unwelcome, and somehow still aching. I let it ring twice before answering, hand already shaking. Mom, he said. No emotion, just the word, heavy with unsaid things. Nate, I answered quieter. Can we meet? I paused. Where? Somerset Park, by the old fountain. The same park where we used to take Ella to feed the ducks, where Jonah took his first steps, where I once held Nate's hand after his first breakup, rubbing small circles on his knuckles and telling him heartbreak didn't mean failure. I agreed. The morning air was sharp. Leaves littered the pathway in shades of gold and rust. I wore my navy coat and brought the envelope in my purse, the one containing the revised will and my personal letter. It wasn't ammunition, it was just truth, neatly folded. Nate was already there when I arrived, sitting on a weathered bench beneath the maple trees. He looked smaller than I remembered. Not physically, he was still broad-shouldered, still clean-shaven, but reduced, diminished, like someone living at half volume. Thanks for coming, he said. I sat beside him but didn't offer closeness. There was silence, long, full of weight. I saw the mail come back, he started. The journal. For Ella, I nodded. I figured. He looked at his hands. Aubrey sent it back without telling me. That admission hit like a knock on a door I thought had been nailed shut. I should have called sooner, he added. You should have done a lot of things, I said. Not cruel, just clear. He winced but didn't argue. I read your letter, he said next. The one you sent with the first draft of your memoir. I hadn't expected him to bring it up. You wrote that silence cost us everything. I nodded. Because it did. He looked at me, really looked. I thought I was protecting them. No, I said. You were protecting her and yourself, and in the process, you erased me. I didn't mean to. That doesn't mean it didn't happen. The leaves rustled above us. A breeze lifted the edge of my scarf. I stayed silent for peace, I said, voice trembling. But silence cost us everything. He blinked fast. I want to fix it, he said. I do. I reached into my purse and handed him the envelope. What's this? My will, I said. Revised, signed, not meant to punish, meant to reflect. He opened it, scanned the front page, then the next, his mouth opened slightly, breath catching when he reached the personal letter. I didn't expect this, he murmured. I know. He kept reading. The wind lifted one of the pages. He grabbed it gently before it could fly away. The image burned in my memory. My son, reading the end of his entitlement, the beginning of my boundaries, on a park bench where we once built castles out of leaves. I didn't know you'd gotten this far, he said quietly. I had to. He folded the papers and stared ahead. Do you hate me? He asked, not turning. No, I said, but I don't trust you. His throat bobbed. Fair. I believe you were hurt, I continued. But I also believe you hurt others. And you didn't stop it. He said nothing. Ivy gave me recordings, I added. He flinched. I didn't know she'd kept those. She didn't do it for revenge. She did it to survive. He looked down. I'm not asking for your guilt, Nate, I said. I'm asking for your honesty, and maybe one day, your accountability. He nodded. I don't know how to fix it. You don't, not alone. He looked at me then, eyes full and red. I miss them. So do I said. Another silence, less sharp now, more shared. Then from his coat pocket, he pulled out a white envelope. Aubrey doesn't know about this, he said. It came to my address last week. From family court, he handed it to me. I opened it with numb fingers. Petition for supervised visitation. Filed on behalf of minor children. Ella Caldwell, 10. Jonah Caldwell, 7. My knees weakened. I gripped the bench. They want to see you, he said. They've been asking. Who filed this? The court-appointed counselor. Apparently, Ella spoke up. Told them you used to braid her hair every Friday, that you always smelled like cinnamon, that she misses you. I covered my mouth. She's brave, he added. Like you. I laughed, short, stunned. I'm not brave, I whispered. You are now. We sat there until the wind picked up again. He left first. I didn't hug him. He didn't ask. But before he walked away, he said, "You did what I couldn't." After he was gone, I stayed on that bench until the light changed, until the leaves piled around my boots, until I could believe that some truths find their way, no matter how long they're uninvited. It was Miriam who first said it, gently but without flinching. You've lived most of your life trying to be a good mother, but maybe it's time to ask if good meant silent. I didn't answer right away. I couldn't. The truth of it lodged somewhere between my ribcage and my pride. Good. What had that ever meant? I made birthday cakes from scratch, remembered their teachers' names, never yelled in public, and always smiled in photos, even when the loneliness in those rooms was choking. In that therapy session, I finally let myself unravel. Not perform sadness or strength, just speak. I didn't learn mothering from love, I said. I learned it from fear. Fear of being forgotten, of being unneeded. I thought if I was quiet enough, helpful enough, I'd earn permanence. Miriam didn't interrupt. She let the silence breathe. My mother was never cruel, I added. Just absent. Not physically, but emotionally. Love was rationed in our house. You got it when you earned it. And I swallowed hard. I did the same to Nate without knowing. I gave him approval, not affection. And when he married someone who demanded his obedience, I mistook it for love. Because I'd been taught love was something you proved by staying. I wept then. The quiet kind of crying that doesn't collapse you. It remakes you, strip by strip, layer by layer. That night I wrote in my journal, I wasn't a good mother. I was a present mother. There's a difference. One my grandchildren might one day understand. Meanwhile, the people around me were transforming in their own quiet revolutions. Ivy left her boyfriend. She didn't make a scene, didn't post about it. She simply packed a suitcase one morning and left a note that read, I no longer owe you my smaller self. She moved into the spare room at Lorraine's for a while. They took turns cooking, folding laundry, watching movies. Once, I came over to find them dancing barefoot in the living room, singing off-key to Fleetwood Mac. It felt like hope. Lorraine, too, was thawing. She reached out to her daughter, Emily, after 5 years of silence. They met at a coffee shop halfway between their cities, talked for hours, no apologies, just acknowledgement. She told me I was always more disappointed than proud, Lorraine told me later. And she was right. I measured her in unmet expectations. I nodded. I did that to Nate. And yet here we are, she said. Unlearning in our 60s. Unlearning. It was the only word that made sense for the life we were building. One evening, I received an email from the elementary school. I hadn't realized I was still on the list. The subject line read, Fall Play, Community Guests. Welcome. I clicked. The flyer was bright, with little stick figure trees and names of all the cast members. There it was, in black and white. Ella Caldwell as narrator number 2. I stared at the screen for 5 minutes. Then I bought a ticket. I wore a gray coat and a scarf that didn't draw attention. I sat in the last row behind a pillar. I didn't tell anyone I was going. I just went. The auditorium was warm, buzzing with chatter. Parents juggled toddlers and juice boxes. Teachers ran around with clipboards. I kept my head down, and then the lights dimmed. The children filed on stage in costume, painted leaves, oversized paper trees, music played, a hush fell. And then, Ella. She stepped into the spotlight, book in hand, voice clear and strong. In the forest of forgetting, she began, there lived a little girl who remembered everything. I forgot to breathe. She was taller, her hair pulled back with a ribbon. She stood with such confidence, such poise, so unlike the girl I last hugged years ago before it all fell apart. I didn't cry. I just watched, every line, every gesture. And when she finished, I applauded. Not a standing ovation, not loud, just enough for her to hear if her heart was listening. The play ended. The lights came on. Parents crowded the aisles with flowers and congratulations. I left through the side door, coat pulled tight, walked to my car in the dark, sat for a long time, not grieving, just full of pride, of sorrow, of something too large for words. Back home, I made tea, sat at the kitchen table, and began drafting something I hadn't known I'd been waiting to write, an application for a nonprofit license. I called it the Unheard Voice Project. Mission: to provide advocacy, emergency support, and community education for women in emotionally coercive environments. Not just bruises, not just shelters, but voices, journals, therapy stipends, resource lists, truth-telling. I filed the paperwork the following Monday. Miriam helped me write the founding letter. Ivy offered to design the logo. Lorraine promised to handle grant outreach. We were 3 women, flawed, fierce, once silenced, now architects. That night, I returned to my memoir, added a chapter titled, The Myth of the Good Mother. It began, they may never know what I did for them, but they'll feel it in who they become. I was in the garden when the final call came, not from Nate, not from the court. Just a gentle ring of the landline I'd nearly forgotten still worked, a voice on the other end confirming what had quietly been building for months. Aubrey is under investigation for financial misconduct. Her parenting arrangement has been reassessed. Custody is temporarily granted to Nate. I thanked the woman, wrote down nothing, hung up, returned to the soil. I didn't cheer. I didn't weep. I just pressed my fingers into the dirt and breathed. The tulip bulbs needed spacing. The morning was cool, gentle. The light fell in soft waves through the peach tree, casting leaf shadows over the wooden table I'd refinished last summer. A robin hopped near the fence, bold and unafraid. Ivy was due to arrive later with scones. Lorraine was bringing her daughter to help prime the mural. The garage wall had been scraped and prepped a week earlier. Ivy had drawn the outline. The image was quiet but potent. 2 weathered hands cupping a bundle of seeds, fingers dirt-streaked, palms open. Not a fist? Not a warning. An offering. The hands were mine, though no one said so aloud. The mural had become a neighborhood project. Women of every age came to paint, brushstrokes layered with stories. One woman said it reminded her of her aunt who taught her to read. Another said it looked like her grandmother's prayers. And I smiled. Inside, the house had changed too. New curtains, a fresh coat of paint in the kitchen. The table was rarely empty now. Ivy's laughter echoed down the hall. Lorraine's coffee mug lived by the sink. There were bookmarks left on armrests, shoes kicked off at the door, half-finished puzzles near the windowsill. I had stopped waiting for silence to feel like safety. It now felt like room. Room to heal, room to host, room to let go. That week, I finished the final edit of my memoir, without permission. The last chapter had been the hardest, not because of the pain, but because I wanted to end it with truth, not triumph. No cinematic revenge, no sweeping reunion, just resolution. I printed 1 copy, wrapped it in parchment, addressed it to a P.O. box I knew still redirected to Ella's school. No name, no return address. Just a note. For your questions, whenever you're ready to ask them. I mailed it the same morning I planted sweet alyssum by the porch. Their scent was small but sure, trailing gently along the breeze. Inside, Ivy played Nina Simone while she baked. Lorraine paced on the phone with a new grant advisor. I sat at the table, watching the light shift across the hardwood, catching in the curve of the vase holding wildflowers. This was not a life rebuilt. It was a life begun. At 64. The women who came through the house called it the nest, not because it held them, but because it prepared them to fly. And I, for the first time, did not feel abandoned when they left. I felt useful, seen, believed. One afternoon, Ella walked past the house with her counselor. I recognized the coat, the way her braid hung unevenly to the left. I didn't call her name, didn't wave, but I did step out onto the porch, pretending to water the succulents. She glanced up. Our eyes met. For 3 full seconds. She didn't smile, she didn't look away. She just saw me, and that was enough. The next morning, someone left a single paper crane on my doorstep, blue with silver stars, no note. I placed it on the mantel. I didn't tell anyone. That evening, I sat at the kitchen table, flipping through an old notebook, reading notes I'd written in therapy, words like unlearn, legacy, and softness. I wrote a new one. I didn't cut them out to hurt them. I did it to stop hurting myself. And then I turned out the lights. The house, now filled with memory and motion, glowed in the dark. Not haunted, just full and open. If this story stirred something buried in you, if you've ever been silenced, erased, or rewritten, stay with us. We're not just telling stories. We're unearthing legacies. Every truth untold has a name. And sometimes, healing begins when you recognize your own. This isn't the end, it's the beginning of yours.